Welcome to today's briefing. My name's Aaron. We're going to start with some tragic news coming out of Marine Air Station Miramar. We lost an F-18 late Thursday night just east of the airfield here. What we know is limited right now. We know that it was a two-seater F-18 Delta attached to the 2nd Marine Aircraft Wing, All-Weather Fighter Squadron 224. The pilot was found deceased at the scene of the crash, not apparently ejected anywhere else. From the limited information we have, the pilot appears to try to recover the stricken aircraft and bring it back to the airbase, which they were almost successful in doing. They were just a little bit short of the runway when the airplane crashed. It is also likely that the pilot chose to stay with the plane to save lives on the ground because the area around the crash site has a lot of housing. Miramar and this whole San Diego area is very densely packed with people. This was happening in the middle of the night when people were asleep. If the plane had, God forbid, glided into any kind of housing, there certainly would have been multiple casualties. I believe the pilot knew that and chose to stay with the plane and try to recover it. So as the investigation continues and some details come out, I expect that to be part of the report, and we'll bring that to you when that is released. But for now, our condolences from everyone here at Subbrief to the families and friends of this pilot, who I believe sacrificed his or her life to save lives on the ground. Very, very sad. So with that, let's move on. Let's move over to North Korea. Rocket Man over here is trying desperately to get his first military recon satellite into the air, into orbit, and we just won't let him do it. This is his second attempt and his second failure to get this specific type of recon satellite into orbit. The first failure was back in May. They spent all summer building a new rocket, building a new satellite, and they launched it again this week. And again, first, second stage worked just fine because they're very good at building rockets. But wouldn't you know it, the emergency blasting system triggered for some reason on stage 3, spiraling it out of control and safely into the East China Sea. Again. So he can try a third time if he wants, but we're not going to let him get this military recon site up there. Now, they have they've done other successful launches. Some of them, I believe, have also been recon satellites. This one is the first military-specific recon satellite for the purpose of going over Japan and North Korea, South Korea region to locate military targets, which is why your third flight won't be successful either, my friend. I'm just letting you know, but they're probably going to try. So this Yiling Yang #1 or Type 1 military satellites there, you can see the gold foil around the satellite. It's out of focus on purpose for operational security reasons, not ours, North Korea's security reasons. And you can see the leader there in his white suit among rocket scientists. It's funny about this picture, he looks awfully uncomfortable there before the satellite. I guess when he's surrounded by people that are more highly educated than he is, even though he's the leader, he's not always comfortable in this situation. That's what I get from this. All right, speaking of uncomfortable, let's talk about Mr. Senator Tommy Tuberville, Republican out of Alabama. He continues to hold up promotions for 86 Navy flag officers. The reason why he's doing this is been a little bit spun out of control in the media, so I want to try and bring some facts to this. He's doing this because he believes the Department of Defense is violating something called the Hyde Amendment. The Hyde Amendment was originally written back in the late 1970s and has been changed over the years to keep up with the times. Its current iteration prevents any federal funds to be going to pay for abortions. Okay, so what he's complaining about is that now that abortion is illegal in Alabama, active duty members who are stationed in Alabama but may not be from Alabama are being compensated by the Pentagon with travel vouchers and per diem if they choose to drive outside the state of Alabama for an abortion procedure or in vitro fertilization procedure. So that's being covered. The travel cost is being covered by the Pentagon for active duty service members if that happens. He is saying that that is funding abortion, which I disagree with. And so I criticized him a few videos ago. I just wanted to add this clarifying statement to this. These are the people that he's holding up promotions for. This is just 3 of the 86 flag officers. And as you can see here, Rear Admiral Fred Catcher is going to the Naval Academy. Congratulations to him. George Wickoff is taking over Naval Air Forces. And Tom Anderson, U.S. Naval Sea Systems, person or a command that I used to do contract work for. So glad to see that the Navy's moving forward with these position replacements because the people who are there, a lot of them are retiring and they need to have a replacement, despite the senator's actions. So I would just say this in closing, because I know this is a very divisive topic and I don't want to divide any of you. My position is I just simply think the senator is going after the wrong people. Holding up the promotions of these flag officers has nothing to do with per diem and travel vouchers for active duty service members in the state of Alabama. They're not related at all. So I just think he's going after the wrong target and he should reassess his decision. If he does not, I would ask the people of Alabama to simply vote the senator out of office and choose another one next election. And I'll just leave it at that. All right, let's move on to the previous video we did. We talked about unmanned aerial vehicles flying over the South China Sea, keeping an eye on the actions and behaviors of illegal fishing and the Chinese Coast Guard, involving itself in Vietnam and Philippine actions, bullying tactics, essentially. We're going to start recording all of that. And in the course of explaining where these flights would come from and how long they would take, we talked about 80-hour flights out of Guam and 40-hour flights out of the Philippines. Many of you corrected me in the comments saying that there are multiple options for 40-hour flights out of Guam as well, that I did not mention. I said specifically that there would only be 80-hour flights out of Guam. So I bring this slide back to your attention again to point out why I did not mention the 40-hour flights out of Guam. If you read the slide and think about the context of this, which is what I expect my audience to do for commenting, the 40-hour flights out of Guam are there to show how inefficient they are, that they should not be chosen as an option, although they are an option. It also highlights how effective one 80-hour flight out of Guam is compared to multiple 40-hour flights out of Guam. So that's the context of this slide. And this is the level of comprehension that we expect here at Subbrief. So this certainly is not a wag of the finger. I will do a better job of explaining this in the future. That's my fault. But my viewers, our community, you guys are very intelligent. And we expect you to not just read slides, we expect you to think about what's the slide meaning? What is it saying? And that's why I even highlighted in red the 80-hour and the 40-hour that I talked about specifically. Okay, so that's the explanation for that. I hope that's enough for everybody. Again, it's not a wag of the finger. It's the level of information we're presenting to you requires some thought. All right, let's get on to our main story here. The loss of the F-35 Bravo from the UK Navy, the Royal Navy, all the way back in November of 2021. Its investigation has been declassified and released to the public, and I read it. So we're going to talk about this briefly here. First of all, I want to say about this, man, did they redact this report a lot, unnecessarily, to the point of comedy. The person who is redacting this report clearly, in my opinion, doesn't know what he or she's doing. They redacted everything, including this picture in the lower right-hand corner that you see here of the aircraft carrier. Things like the flight deck has been redacted. I shouldn't, according to the slide, even tell you that there's a flight deck on an aircraft carrier. And there's multiple other things on this aircraft carrier that are obvious and have common names, but yet have been redacted. And so because of the redaction, we're not going to cover anything that's redacted, of course. But this is the level of classification that we're dealing with whenever they're declassifying investigations. They're going way too far to the point of absurdity in terms of removing information that is common knowledge to laymen. All right, but let's get on with the report. So what happened to this F-35? Well, the F-35 is on an aircraft carrier. This is one of the short takeoff and landing F-35s. That's that variant, right? And because it's on an aircraft carrier, it has this foreign material debris protection on it, often called red gear because it's red in color. And these are foam inserts that are kept in things like air intakes, exhaust blanks, pitot tubes get covered with these red coverings to protect it from the elements. It just makes sense to do this, right? Well, all this stuff has to be removed before flight operations. And there's three people responsible for checking it, 2 people responsible for doing it, 2 engineers, and of course the pilot himself checked this stuff. So here is the right intake of an F-35 Bravo with its foreign material insert in the right air intake. This is normally what you would see before you removed it, right? If you look at the other picture on the left-hand side, this is an example of what happened to the red gear on the left air intake. It somehow got pushed or blown deep enough into the air intake where it wasn't obviously visible to anyone. So when the first engineer began prepping the plane for flight, hours before the flight was going to take off, it was still dark topside. So they're using rig for red flashlights, looking for red gear. It's hard to see red when you have a red flashlight. Everything looks red. And so that was, the first problem. Because this plane has so much gear on it, look at this, the first engineer begins removing all these things, but he can't carry it all at once. So that's why they have a second engineer. Well, the second engineer was still working on another plane, finishing up whatever he was doing with that one before the first engineer began his work. So because the first engineer couldn't carry everything, he went back and he set it all down and never went back to finish the job because he got distracted. This is where things begin to go wrong hours before the flight even happens. The second engineer finally finishes what he's doing and comes and to assist the first one. He checks the plane for red gear as he's supposed to do with his little rig for red flashlight. From his perspective, everything, all the red gear is off the plane. He doesn't see the left air intake red gear pushed all the way in to the point of being nearly invisible whenever he flashes his light in there. He thinks it's clear. He goes back to the first engineer and they continue doing their job. Okay. That plane is prepped and ready to go. Now, every pilot is required to do a walk around before they get into the plane. And he does his procedure properly. And whenever he checks the air intakes, he sees that both air intakes appear to be clear. There's no obstruction or anything. When in reality, the left air intake red gear is just wedged so far deep into it, you can't see it easily. Part of it is still there, but it's not easily observed. So the pilot gets into the plane, preps for takeoff, fires up the engine. He has good fuel flow. He has all good indications on his board that the engine is at full power, despite the left air intake being partially blocked. Apparently, there's no indication in the cockpit for that specific fault. So everything appears to be good to the pilot. He is the first in his small flight to take off, and they begin taking off. I should mention that this photo is not of the event. This is just an example that I'm providing for you here. So from the point that the plane begins rolling on the deck, remember, there's no catapult on this particular aircraft carrier. They have to literally drive it off into the air up this ramp. So he begins rolling forward, and the pilot immediately recognizes that, hey, he's not accelerating fast enough to be anywhere near the speed it takes to take off, despite the ship moving forward at 5 knots with a 12-knot wind over the deck, adding lift to the plane, which is normal procedure. That's normal flight operation envelope for them. So before he gets to the ramp, he goes against all of his training and decides to abort the flight by hitting the toe brakes inside the cockpit. They are trained in flight school that once they begin rolling, they are committed to getting off the deck no matter what may occur. Well, he goes against that and decides to stop anyway because he knows correctly that there's no way he's flying. His only option at this point is to stop. So now we're in no man's land. We don't know. This has never been drilled. This has never been practiced. There's no procedure for this. He's just hoping he can stop the plane. And he begins the braking procedure with both feet on the pedals right as he gets to the ramp. Of course, he doesn't slow down enough to prevent from leaving the ship. He's certainly not fast enough to fly. So then he takes the ejection position, bringing his arms in, grabs the ejection handles, and ejects himself as the plane goes over the side of the ship. He goes up into the air, the parachute deploys normally, and with the ship moving at 5 knots right behind him, he ends up landing on the deck, the flight deck that he just took off from. Now, he has a real problem because he has a parachute attached to his body, and there's a 12-knot wind coming over the deck that's going to grab that parachute, reinflate it, and drag him into the water. So he remembers his training. He flips off the parachute immediately, and the parachute gets swept away in the wind. But he has another problem. He has a lot of life-saving equipment, food rations, water, and whatnot attached to his body, flares, a radio to save himself in the case of a ditching. And that part of that equipment is hanging over the side, dragging him off the front of the aircraft carrier. So the flight deck crew that's supposed to immediately respond to any kind of casualty, of course, sees this. They do their job perfectly. They get to the pilot, cutting away that gear, letting it go over the side before it drags the pilot with it, saving the pilot's life. So once the ejection process begins, everybody does their job perfectly. The pilot does, The crew does. The equipment works. And another piece of gear that I wasn't even aware of until this report came out is that when a UK aviation ejection happens, it sends a signal to a satellite network that contacts the UK and all the command structure back there. So at the moment any ejection happens, the location of the pilot is transmitted, not just to the ship, but to command back in England. So good on them for everyone basically got notified of this event, this incident, all at the same time. Pretty incredible technology. And the fact that they followed their procedures after the ejection happened, it saved the pilot's life. So what happened to the plane? Well, the plane stayed on the surface for a few minutes as the aircraft carrier drove by it. And wouldn't you know it, as they snapped this photo, what can you see float to the surface is that red left air intake foam insert floats up with the middle finger waving high saying, "You forgot to take me out of the plane." And so it's pretty obvious right away what part of the problem was to everybody that can see what that is. Of course, the plane, not being buoyant, does sink to the bottom and it inverts. It's upside down on the bottom of the Mediterranean Sea. This is frame BK-18 is found with high frequency, high resolution sonar and is recovered. So the pilot's safe. The plane has been recovered. And that's not the end of the story. Of course, they have this investigation and they change a couple procedures. For one, whenever it's nighttime and you're using your rig-for-red flashlight, they've added an exception that the officer in charge of the flight deck and operations, if he deems it necessary, they can use a white flashlight to verify all the red gear has been removed. So that's a big change. The second big change was they've added a checklist accountability system for every single piece of red gear. So as they take it off, they don't just throw it in the bin like they used to. They have to account for the left side air intake, the exhaust exit, the right side air intake, so it's all documented now in checklist. Now, from a submariner's point of view, it's shocking to me that they didn't have that checklist to begin with, or at least some auditing procedure to ensure that all those pieces of red gear are taken off. But I guess different communities have different standards. Even, on submarines, we have a checklist for everything, including flushing the toilet. I'm not joking. We really do. Every stall has the procedure right there. As you're flushing it, you check, you follow the procedure. So, but the good news is there were no major injuries. I'm sure the pilot got a little bit banged up during an injection. That's not a fun thing to experience. And then landing on a moving flight deck full of non-skid probably scraped him up a little bit, but no major injuries. And there's no death involved, thank God. They recovered the plane, they saved the pilot, and they updated their procedures to become better aviators and sailors. So there's a happy ending to this. And so I want to thank everybody for watching this update. We didn't expect to do a video today. Definitely check out the Patreon. We're putting a lot of stuff now on Patreon that we're not seeing anywhere else. So I'll see you guys over there. Thanks for watching. Bye. What happened to the video? It went black. The hell? I don't know. Jane!